Have you heard about Microsoft for Startup Founders Hub, a platform to help all founders to grow and scale their startups? You can join Founders Hub at any of the 4 levels. For founders who are refining their ideas, you can join at level 1, the ideate stage. Founders with a strong conviction of their solution join at level 2, the develop stage, to build their minimum viable product. For founders with a working product and want to add new features while gaining customer traction, you can join at level 3, the grow stage. And lastly, for founders with a product in market and want to focus on the sales acceleration, you can join at level 4, the scale stage. Founders get up to $150,000 worth of Azure credits and free OpenAI credits to include LLMs and generative AI capabilities in your product. You also get access to enterprise developer tools such as GitHub and Visual Studio, and productivity tools such as M365, Dynamics 365, and Power Platform to run your businesses. Lastly, you get one-on-one technical consultations with Microsoft experts to help you as you build out your products. Apply today at aka.ms/foundershub.
Hello, everyone, and welcome. Thank you all so much for joining us today for this live stream event. My name is Alexia, and I am the program manager of the Microsoft Reactor Toronto. We will be sharing session resources with you in the chat, but before we begin, I'd like to quickly review 2 items: our code of conduct and event guidelines. First, please take a moment to review our code of conduct. Microsoft Reactor seeks to provide a respectful environment for both our audience and presenters. We encourage engagement in the chat, but please be mindful of your commentary, remain professional and on topic. And secondly, our event guidelines. This session is being recorded and will be available on demand through the Microsoft Reactor YouTube channel in about 24 to 48 hours. I will be sharing the link in the chat for our on-demand content. And if you have not been on a live stream through YouTube before, please note that you must create an account on YouTube in order to have access and interact in the chat. You can set that up now, and if you're unable to use the chat but have questions, feel free to reach out to us through social media or on our website. Which brings us to today's session, enabling generative AI application with Azure OpenAI. I'm going to bring in our speaker here for today. Hi, Werner. How are you?
Hey, how are you, Alicia? Doing great.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for joining us for this session.
Absolutely. Very
Yeah,
excited about this.
absolutely. Well, without further ado, take it away.
Thank you. And thanks, everybody. Thank you for joining us today, wherever you might be in the world, since we're broadcasting on the internet. You've taken some time out of your day to come and learn with us, and I truly appreciate that. So, allow me to introduce myself. I've started my career as a DBA quite a while ago. I've been mostly doing consulting for over a decade at this point. I used to work for Hewlett Packard in Costa Rica at the beginning of my career. I work now as a solutions architect at Pythian. And Pythian has a headquarters in Ottawa, Ontario, as well as in Minnesota in the United States. I'm honored to be a Microsoft Data Platform MVP. Feel free to reach out to me on any of my socials that are on the screen. And also feel free, if you want, to add me on LinkedIn. Just search me by name. I am the only Werner Chavez that is a solutions architect at Pythian. And you can just click connect. I love to connect with anybody that has come and learned with any of my sessions. All right, so the topic for today, the agenda, we're going to do a quick intro. And I mean, as in, just like 8, 9 slides I have, and that's it. The rest is going to be a guided tour, 100% demo of Azure capabilities to build Gen AI applications using the Azure OpenAI models. Now, Microsoft, now that we're doing this live stream, we're actually in a very interesting moment in time. Microsoft just did their Ignite conference. I think it was about 10, 11 days ago, and a lot of stuff was released, the new Azure AI Studio. So I'm going to showcase some of that as well. That goes a little bit outside of the scope of the actual open AI models, but I thought it was really important to just show everybody the latest and greatest as well, since it just literally got released during Ignite last week. So we're going to cover a little bit of Gen AI concepts, very little. We're going to talk about the Azure OpenAI service and what's the big deal about it. And like I said, we're going to focus on demos most of all for today. All right, so Gen AI, let's define. It's a type of AI that can create new content, such as text, images, audio, and nowadays even video. There's some services now where you can do what is called text to video. So you say, I want a video of a puppy chasing a ball on the beach, or you can even do something very interesting. Some people have might have tried this already, but you can do image to video. So you can take a picture of your puppy and upload it and say, I want this puppy running around in my room, and the video will generate something. It's not going to replace Hollywood anytime soon, but these models are just evolving so fast with new capabilities to create all this new content. So it's important to differentiate, right? We're not talking about classical machine learning. We're not talking about some of the other artificial intelligence in the cognitive area that we already had, like transcribing, like being able to recognize speech, like being able to do OCR for documents, being able to do things like photo and image recognition. This is about creating new content, right? That's why it's called generative AI. And using that kind of behavior, we can do all sorts of creative things that go beyond just creating new content, like, being able to automatically call functions, being able to create agents that will have their own behavior, and so on. I mean, the space is very early, so I'm sure there's going to be tons of other use cases that will come along. Most people, when they think about Gen AI, or their most familiar experience is the interface of ChatGPT, right? ChatGPT, Bing Chat, image generators like Dall-e or Midjourney. You provide some sort of input, and then it gives you an output, whether it's in text or in photos, right? So that's the most common experience that people will have with generative AI. But like I said, um, one thing is to use Gen AI as a user, and another thing is to use Gen AI as an actual company, right? As somebody that's trying to build an enterprise or a product, right? So a consumer, a user of just, I just pull up ChatGPT, let's say on my phone. I say, oh, well, I have these ingredients from my fridge. Give me a recipe so I can make dinner, or help me plan a road trip, or give me a blog post template for a birthday because I want to write something. And ChatGPT will suggest all the headings and the things you can talk about. And, I'm writing a novel, help me with a critique. You can put in some text. ChatGPT will say, well, I think you missed this part. You could rewrite it at this or not. You can discard what it says, or you can take its advice if you want. So there's a lot of, interesting end user um, things you can do with ChatGPT. But at the end of the day, when we're talking about the enterprise or somebody that's trying to create an actual product, those might not be the same needs that we get from the model, right? So, as an enterprise, let's say, for example, we want data analysts to be able to search and summarize data within our regulatory environment, right? So if it's data that can't leave our Azure storage, can't leave our subscription, for example, right? If we want to do, let's say, intelligent customer service, we want to automate these service interactions in a way that is accurate, right? So the model should use reference data, should minimize hallucination, and we wanted to do it in a safe way too, right? So there should be some guardrails as to what the model is allowed to do. We want to know that we have lots of models available, right? Not just nowadays, it's not even just OpenAI models, even though OpenAI models are still the state of the art in the industry. How do we merge this technology with existing governance and security policies? I don't want to just do a free for all for the LLM and for all the data that is going to be given to the LLM as well. How do we track and manage cost? Obviously, it's very important so that we understand how we're spending our Gen AI money. And is it easy to integrate, right, with all the apps, with the platform in general? And this is really where, Azure AI, OpenAI service shines, right? Is we take all that IP, proprietary technology from OpenAI. Like I said, the GPT models are still the state of the art models for language processing, and we integrate it with Azure. And nowadays, like I said, fresh off the Ignite announcement, we have a whole garden of new models that you can host in Azure that'll go even beyond the OpenAI. So I'll show a little bit in the Azure AI Studio demo, but just to keep that in mind as well, if you, for whatever reason, have a preference for another model or for a different use case, you can now also have hosted models that go beyond just OpenAI. So why Azure? If you want to use one of the GPT models, well, first of all, Microsoft is the major investor in OpenAI. So if you want to run any of the GPT models in a public cloud, Microsoft is your exclusive choice right now, but it is a great choice. Microsoft obviously has a lot of elastic capacity of GPU power that they can utilize in Azure to run training and to run generation on these models. There's a variety of choice of regions, right? Microsoft has a lot of regions around the world. So if you have any kind of data sovereignty requirements, or just to put it close to where your data is, you can rely on Azure as well. There's built-in security, governance, compliance. So everything that is built around Azure in terms of network security, in terms of the authentication, in terms of policies for access, your AD groups, all of that can be integrated with the Azure OpenAI service, right? Cloud scale for your data, right? You can put all your data in Azure Data Lake Storage. Maybe you're adopting Microsoft Fabric, so you're going to put it in Open Lake. And again, all this will work integrated with OpenAI and with some of the other services that work with the OpenAI service, which we'll see in the demo as well. And this leads me to the last point here in this slide, is that there's many other services available to build a solution. For the demo, we will just look at, for example, how would you would integrate with Cosmos DB, how we would use Azure AI Search to give the LLM context, how we can use Azure Document Intelligence to do intelligent parsing of documents, and all these things come together to produce a solution. And for the demo, it's going to be kind of like a ChatGPT clone, but all built with Azure components and hosted in Azure. All right. Now, a question that sometimes I get related to this topic is, doesn't OpenAI already offer an enterprise option? And they do actually. OpenAI directly offers an enterprise option where basically they give you an API endpoint to the different OpenAI models. And the promise in terms of what is enterprise for OpenAI is that they won't train their models with your data or with your conversations if you're using the enterprise option. Okay. But in my opinion, Azure still comes up ahead compared to just running OpenAI directly with the enterprise option. The reason for that is, one, region availability. This one is probably the most important because A, if you have any data sovereignty requirements, you're allowed to, you can really, instead of moving the data over to talk to the OpenAI endpoint, you're actually bringing the model into where the data is in your Azure region, right? Latency improvement for the same reason. Now the data is close to where you run the compute for inference. Inference is when the model is generating things. So now the data is closer. So latency in general improves compared to sending the data over to the OpenAI endpoints. So proximity to data, very important again for responsiveness. It supports tighter security architectures as well. So for example, if you have, let's say you have a GPT model and you fine tune it, you can place that endpoint as a private endpoint inside your a specific Azure virtual network, and then nobody can talk to that LLM unless they're inside that virtual network, right? So you can do something that is a lot tighter than just firewalling in or out the OpenAI endpoint that you get if you do an OpenAI enterprise. Um, you get Azure support, obviously, from a technical perspective, from a legal and compliance perspective as well, and it's integrated with the rest of the Azure platform, like we'll see in the demo. And Microsoft, another thing very important, Microsoft is developing a lot of tools. There's a lot of R&D going in right now. Obviously, this space has exploded in the last year or so. ChatGPT came out. Actually, I think it was a year from today or a year from yesterday. It's actually very, 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 very timely. It's been 1 year since ChatGPT came out. I saw Sam Altman posted on Twitter about this, um, and so in that 1 year, the industry has just been taken by storm. So everything is moving really fast. There's a lot of tooling being developed, and Microsoft is definitely not sleeping on this. And I'm going to show some of this new stuff as well as part of the demo. All right. So what do we have available in terms of OpenAI? So GPT-4 is the multi-model model and like the state of the art of the models right now. As in the Ignite conference, they announced that we're going to have GPT-4 Turbo coming soon and GPT-4 Turbo with Vision. So with Vision is the model that you can feed it images and it can interact with you based on the content of the images. If you're just doing text, you can do GPT 3.5 Turbo or 4, and 4 Turbo is coming soon. If you need to generate embeddings, you can use the ADA model. Embeddings is when you feed some text and it gets turned into a numerical vector that you can then use for document searching. We'll look at what that looks like as well in the demo. For image generation, there's Dall-e 2. Dall-e 3 is the latest, which is a big leap compared to Dall-e 2, but it's they announced in Ignite that it's coming soon. It's not there yet, or at least not for my subscription yet. So I can't really demo Dall-e 3, but we can demo Dall-e 2. Audio to text. So this is a model that OpenAI actually has released as open source. Is not closed. The other models are all closed. Audio to text. So this is a transcribing model that is there in Azure as well. If you have a transcribing use case. Now, actually, Microsoft has already had a transcribing model as part of cognitive services. So I haven't tested them out, see which one is better, but it is there and it is available. All right, so let's check out the demo. I'm gonna go through all the Azure AI experiences. We're gonna look at our sample application, and then we're gonna look behind the scenes at the sample application, and then we'll have time for Q&A as well. So this is what we're building here, our ChatGPT clone. Like I said before, the web interface is hosted in an Azure app service. To save the history of conversations, the solution is using Cosmos DB. To do the authentication is using Microsoft Entra, previously known as Azure Active Directory. When you prompt something to the app service sends the prompt over to Azure OpenAI service, and Azure OpenAI service sends back the response. In our ChatGPT clone, we'll also have the ability to upload a document. Now, when we upload a document, the app service will use this thing called Azure AI Document Intelligence to extract information from the document and index it. In the diagram, it says Azure Cognitive Search. This space moves really fast. Actually, last week they rebranded Cognitive Search. Now it's just Azure AI Search. When you do a question in the context of a document, then Azure AI Search will do a search in its own index and will send the top paragraphs back to Azure OpenAI. And then Azure OpenAI will take your prompt, whatever the question might be, plus the top paragraphs based on that question. And with that, it will create back a response for you to see on the interface. All right. And we're going to check that out live now as we go to the demo. Nice thing about this, the demo that I'm about to show you actually is all publicly available, developed by Microsoft in the Microsoft GitHub. It's just github.com/Microsoft/Azure Chat. All right, so everybody can go and try it out with their Azure subscription. Um, and I'm just gonna, peel the layers of the onion here as we check everything out. All right, so let me switch now out to my browser. And first thing I want to show you here is the actual Azure Chat Accelerator solution. So this is that ChatGPT clone that I was just talking about. So I can start a new chat, for example, and we'll see what's going on here. We can say, hello, GPT, can you write a poem, let's say, about Toronto for me? Short one. Okay, here's a short poem about Toronto. In Toronto's embrace, diversity thrives, a city where cultures intertwine and strive. From the CN Tower's majestic height to the bustling streets, day and night. Beautiful stuff. All right, so it works. It's very responsive, right? You can see here at the top, we actually have the option to say, oh, GPT, we want him to be more creative, or her, I guess, more balanced or more precise. So the models have this thing called temperature. So you can make them more or less creative depending on what you want to do. So if you want them to be more creative, you increase the temperature. If you want it to be less creative, then you decrease the temperature. And there is a playground experience where you can play around with all these parameters and talk to GPT and see how that influences it. And we'll look at that experience in a second. So the other thing we can do here with our ChatGPT clone, and again, that we're going to use this functionality to demo the underlying components of everything, is the ability to upload a file. So I have a file open here. Okay, and let me see. There it is. So this is an incident report. So back on my DBA days, so every time that there was an issue, I used to work almost exclusively with SQL Server. And when every time there was an issue with a SQL Server, we had to write an incident report that basically would describe what was the issue with the SQL Server, what was the timeline, what did we do about it, how was it fixed, and how are we going to prevent it from happening again. So I'm going to upload the document now. And basically, that's what this document is. It's an incident report. So you can see it says incident report client one blocking and slowness in the database was uploaded successfully. And now we can ask questions about this particular incident report. So GPT, summarize this incident for me. One paragraph, please. It's always nice to be polite to the LLM. All right, so it says, based on the provided information, the incident involved blocking and slowness issue on a RIM AG last week. That's an availability group in SQL Server nomenclature. And the incident caused end users to experience slowness. It's, oh, okay, all right. Oh no, GPT, what would you recommend to prevent this in the future? Okay, so based on the context, there's some recommendations that we can make to prevent this similar incident in the future. So the interesting thing here, of course, is that, well, first of all, we're giving GPT a document. GPT is able to access the document using the underlying Azure AI search, gives us a summary of the document. I will show what the document looks like in a minute. And then because this is an LLM model that has been trained with a lot of different general knowledge, we can also just simply ask then, what can we do to prevent this particular type of incident to happen in the future, right? And then it's GPT that makes an answer that kind of like mixes what our document is saying happened and its knowledge of SQL Server and similar issues that people have posted about it on the internet, right? So this is actually a pretty decent use case for LLMs in general, right? IT service support, for example. You can really create a very intelligent assistant, fine-tuned and with the knowledge of like your ticketing history of things that have happened in your environment and so on, right? So this is kind of like what we're trying to showcase here. And now we're going to see how all this works behind the scenes. So I'm going to jump here first into the Azure OpenAI service. So there's two experiences now if you want to deal with the OpenAI models. One is this one, the Azure OpenAI Studio. The other one is the new one that was released last week, which is the Azure AI Studio. So I'm just going to jump here, show you what the OpenAI Studio looks like. 'Cause you might still interact with the OpenAI Studio just because the other AI Studio is very, very new. It has a little bit of stability issues for now. Like I said, it's 10 days old, but the OpenAI one is it's very stable and it's pretty good if you want to just focus on the OpenAI models, right? So you do have the playground, like I said. If you want to interact with one of the models, you have the ability to talk to the model here on the chat playground. If you use the OpenAI developer playground, it's a very similar concept. So you can pick the model that you want to talk to, and you can switch. You can play around with the parameters as well, right? So you can see here, I can set the max size of the response, the temperature that I was talking about, top P. The top P is also like a measure of the creativity of the LLM. So it's another hyperparameter for the model calls. Usually, the recommendation is if you want to make it more or less creative or um, to be able to go more or less off topic, you can try either the temperature or try the top P, but not both of them at the same time for the best results. You can also have some other parameters here, like the frequency penalty or the presence penalty, that basically kind of like tell GPT whether to try not to repeat words or not. Now, something else very important here. Now I'm going to do another hi, GPT. Um, let's see, for example, I can say, again, back to my DBA days, my SQL Server is slow. What can I do? Help me troubleshoot. All right, so then GPT is giving me some common issues for SQL Server slowness now. Check for blocking, check your indexes, check the query plan, check the server, check for fragmentation. All these are actually pretty good advice. But you can see here, right? We have a token counter, which is very handy as well. You can see we've consumed now 281 out of 4,000 tokens. So what does that mean? If you're not familiar with developing applications with LLMs, um, every LLM has a context window. The context window is basically how much information you can feed the LLM to run inference and then give you an output. So in this case, I'm running GPT 3.5 Turbo, which has a context window of 4,000 tokens. A token is 0.75 of a word, more or less. Um, so you see in this short conversation, we consumed about 281 tokens. Now, when we go above 4,000, that means that now the context window can't fit the entire conversation. And if you ever played around with ChatGPT in the same chat window for a long time, you probably have noticed that as you advance in the conversation, it kind of starts to forget details of what you spoke to it at the very beginning, right? And that's because the context window switches. And there's some techniques to deal with that. For example, once you're approaching close to the context window limit, you could summarize the conversation through an LLM call and then shrink that and then continue the conversation and so on. But all that to say is that this is why people keep track of the tokens. Something else that the tokens impact directly is the actual cost, right? So when you are working with any of these models, there is a price for how many input tokens you're sending to the LLM and how many output tokens you're getting back from the LLM as well. Now, because this is the playground, if you want to see the raw JSON, so you can see here the raw JSON from the conversation, and this is the format of uh, the chat API from OpenAI, right? So you have a JSON array of these messages that have role and content. The role here, for example, the system, this is known as the system prompt. It kind of sets the stage for the conversation. So in this case, it has a very general prompt. It just says you are an AI assistant that helps people find information. So like I said, very general. And then after that, it says role user. So this is my message where I was asking for SQL Server help. And then role assistant, that means that's the LLM's response, right? Again, the LLM is playing the role of the assistant. And here's the recommendations that it gave me for SQL Server. Now, if I go back and say, let's see. We have recommendation number one is for blocking. Okay, so I can say, oh, let's dive into recommendation number one and tell me more about it. So it says, sure. So checking for blocking is the first step in troubleshooting. Blocking occurs, blah, blah, blah. So something interesting here. So you can see I said, let's dive into recommendation one and tell me more about it. And then it starts to talk about blocking. So it kind of gives you the impression that the LLM remembers what we just talked about, right? Because I didn't say, let's dive into blocking. I said, let's dive into number one. So it knows the number one was the blocking recommendation. It's not that the LLM has memory. This is something else that you have to keep in mind as you develop LLM applications, right? What happens is behind the scenes, you can see here, my latest message is now appended to this array of messages. So every time that I talk to the LLM, actually, what's happening is that the whole conversation is being sent. And so you can see as well our token counter has now increased from 281 to 508. And as I continue to talk to GPT, then the token counter will continue to increase and more of the conversation will have to be sent back every time we interact so that we keep the context of the conversation um, as part of the processing for the response, right? So just not that the LLM has memory, is that we're giving it the whole conversation every time we do a call. As part of the playground as well, if you want to see some sample code, you can see here. Just click on it and you'll get sample code in Python. You have the option to see the JSON for the conversation, Python code to just do a quick call to generate this particular chat, or you can get C sharp, or you can get a curl, like what does it look like on an actual HTTPS request. So very, very cool stuff. The completions is previously from the chat API, OpenAI had a completions API, which is, you type something and then the LLM kind of like tries to complete what you were saying. So that's the completions playground. It's mostly built for backwards compatibility. Dall-e, if you want to look at generating images, right? You can use that as well. Here you have one that I made, Eiffel Tower at night, lighting up. You can say, something like the pyramid of Giza in the morning. I don't know, we'll see what it does. It's generating an image right now. And again, Dall-E is the model that does text to image generation, right? Oh, there we go. There's the pyramid. Okay. So that's the playgrounds. And then as part of management, you get different access to deployment. So you select a model and then you deploy it, right? So every model will have a name that you give it. You have the version, you have the capacity. So how many tokens per minute you can process with that model, and content filtering, right? So very important. Again, for Microsoft, all about AI safety as well, not just releasing these models out in the wild. There is the whole menu of the models. You can see here we have GPT 3.5 Turbo in a version that's 0613, GPT 3.5 Turbo in a version that's a little bit older for backwards compatibility. So this version is from March. This one is from June. And these two have a context window of 4,000 tokens. There's a GPT 3.5 Turbo with 16,000 tokens. Um, there's GPT-4. I think GPT-4 is also 4,000 tokens, and GPT-4 32K. So that's 32,000 tokens. And I believe GPT-4 Turbo, now there's an option or a version of GPT-4 Turbo that has up to 128,000 tokens, which I think OpenAI said would be like the equivalent of a standard 300 pages of a standard book. So that's a lot of context that you can feed into one shot into the LLM. Now that there's a degree of how much you want to do for that, because it gets first of all, it gets more expensive, but also it's there's some tests people have done where very really large context windows, the LLM sometimes struggle to find a particular fact inside the context window because it's so big. But GPT-4, in the test that I've saw online, GPT-4 was actually the best one at not at finding the facts inside large context windows. So that's something interesting. If you're doing testing or training, you can upload your testing or training data set. So if you're going to fine tune a GPT model to have a new behavior based on your examples, if you are going to do that, you need to follow the documentation very closely as to the format that is expected. You can see here. So you have to create a JSON L file. So every line is a different JSON object with an example conversation that gives you the system prompt, the user prompt, and the assistant prompt back, so that you're given basically the fine-tuning job, the examples of how you want GPT to respond. In this case, Microsoft has the documentation with just 3 messages as an example, but it's recommended, if you're going to attempt this, to do at least 50 examples, and then you need 20 to 30%, so let's say like 15 or so examples to do test and validation after as well. Keep in mind, of course, is that that's just the minimum. You might need more examples depending on the type of behavior that you're trying to fine tune. All right. And then there is a quota. So everybody gets assigned a particular quota of GPT tokens per minute, and you can't go over that quota unless you request more from support. Let me refresh this. There we go. So you can see, for example, I have 3.5 turbo. I've used 150,000 tokens per minute out of my 250,000 tokens per minute quota. So I'm about 63% into my quota. You can request an increase in quota from support if you click on this button, but obviously they will verify that you indeed need that much more and that you're actually going to use it and you're actually going to pay for it. Finally, like I said, as part of the AI safety, you can have a block list of words that will be not allowed as part of the interactions with the LLM, or you can create customized content filters. Again, the AI safety space now, it's after the last year or so has really grown, and there's a lot of new tools and controls being built to minimize the misuse of this technology, right? So for example, in the OpenAI models, we have built-in content filtering for hate content, sexual content, self-harm, and violence, and making sure that people are not, abusing that technology for other purposes. And you have the ability to leave this here. You can't completely disable these, by the way, depending on your use case and what you're trying to do. You might want to allow a lower threshold, or if you want it to be completely not very sensitive and very very safe in its interactions, you can crank this up all the way to high for the different categories, right? So that's depending on your use case, but by default it's all set up to medium, and you can't completely disable it, like I said. So this is the OpenAI Studio. Now this is the Azure AI Studio. I'm going to jump in. This is the new experience that was just released last week. It's very very new, so bear with me if anything doesn't respond or something like that. Like I said, very very new. But right away at the Azure AI Studio, first thing you're going to notice here is that we have a brand new model catalog. And the model catalog has a bunch of models, not just from OpenAI, but from a lot of other vendors. So obviously we have the Azure OpenAI, which is the ones that I focus on this session. But there's a new family called Curated by Azure AI. So these are models kind of like have the rubber stamp from Microsoft. And then there's the models from Meta, Llama being obviously the most famous model from Meta. There's new models from NVIDIA. So NVIDIA being the biggest GPU manufacturer in the world, now they're getting also into the model business. There's some models from Microsoft Research and Hugging Face. If you don't know what Hugging Face is a website where anybody can host their own open models. So you technically can pull any model from Hugging Face that, let's say somebody created a really cool fine tune of Llama, and you think it's a good fit for your use case, you can actually pull it from Hugging Face, host it in Azure, and interact with it through the Azure AI Studio now. So this is something very cool. There's a benchmark section as well, so you can, you know, figure out, oh, I wanna to see how these models do in Q&A, and I want to compare GPT-4 32K with Llama 2 7 billion. So you can do that as well here. You have the models also separated by speech or vision or language capabilities. You have the content safety. So this is a separate service just dedicated to content safety. Again, stuff is very new. You can use the built-in content filtering from the Azure OpenAI service, or if you're going to deploy something like an open source model, but you still need the content safety layer, there is an Azure AI content safety service where you can create different content policies and filters for moderating text content, image content, or multi-model content. And there's also a bunch of samples or different prompts for different use cases as well, right? For summarization, for chat completion, for content creation. These are just examples of prompts that you can try out with your LLMs and see, just to get you going, kind of thing. If you do want to build something through the Azure AI Studio, then there is a project experience. You can deploy a project, and inside that project, you will have different models deployed. You can see here, for example, in this project, I already was playing around with it a few days ago. So I already have GPT 3.5 Turbo, Turbo 16K, and the ADA model that I use for the embedding and so on. Remember the embeddings. This is what enables us to be able to talk to the document. So this is all here in the Azure AI Studio. It also has its own playground, but it has a couple of cool new things as well that we don't have in the other studio experience. First one is evaluation. I haven't played around with this, but I'm really excited about this because a lot of people have been asking me. So, it's really cool to interact with these models. We think there's could be a use case for our application, but how do we test it, right? And I think that's a really important question. And there's a bunch of different approaches online you can find about it, a bunch of different libraries. So this is kind of like Microsoft's reference workflow now to testing and evaluating the behavior of an LLM. So I'm really excited about this. I haven't played around with it yet, but it is there now. Metric evaluations and some manual evaluations as well. So you can talk to the model yourself and kind of like say whether it's good or bad based on your own judgment, and it will save the results of your own manual evaluations as well. And there's another thing called prompt flow. So this is another topic that is pretty hot right now in the industry. out of scope for today's session, but I'm also thinking maybe I'll create a new session about this. And it's about LLM orchestration. Is how do we put together all the different steps for the LLM to fit a particular use case. So for example, I have this demo chat flow here. Just going to go ahead and open it. And you see here we have like a graph on the side. And this one is like the most trivial uh, interaction, right? You have an input, it goes into the chat, and then the chat gives you an output. But if you see here, you can add, for example, Python nodes into it, right? So you can create, let's say, test one, you can add it, and now we could say, well, we want this test one actually to be in between the chat and the output, right? So you can put this here, and let me see, how do we move this up? I have to play around with it a little bit more, but I think you move this up here. How do I get it to move back? Oh yeah, move up. There. So for example, now what I did was we're gonna get an input. We're gonna get the talk to the LLM. The LLM is gonna say or do something, and then there's gonna be some Python code that runs against the test data, the output of the LLM, and then it sends it out as the final output of the whole API call. So this allows you to really do a lot more things with your LLM, right? For example, if you were doing something like service support and you want the LLM to have the list of all the different orders from a user as part of the context, you could add a Python step that connects to your database, brings back the order history, and then injects that into the context of the prompt, and then the LLM generates the answer, right? So this is what I mean by LLM orchestration. And this is, again, new tooling Microsoft is developing just for this particular use case. So very excited about this as well. I need to play around with it more, but it is there as well now. All right, and finally here, there's this thing. Yeah, discard, that's okay. There's this thing here that says custom neural voice. So this is just added to the AI Studio as well, announcement from last week, and is the ability to create custom voices for your agent avatars. This is a limited access service. You guys can see here, I don't have access to it. The Microsoft team, you have to explain to them what you're trying to do, and they have to kind of like onboard you into the program. All right. So that's the Azure AI Studio. And then just to mention, all the other things that come into play to help create these solutions, right? So we have the incident report that we were talking to earlier. You can see it's a PDF and it has a bunch of different sections, headers and whatnot. And using the document intelligence, we can parse and decompose that PDF. And you'll see here how the document intelligence recognizes all the different sections of the PDF and takes out all the different chunks. And that's what gets fed into the Azure AI search. And you'll see here as well how the Azure AI search takes the content, business impact, blah, blah, blah. It came from this document, blocking and slowness in database PDF. And this is the embedding. And the embedding is this big array of numbers. I think it has 1,536 different dimensions in the array. And that is what's used for the similarity search to be able to give the LLM the context for the conversation. For the chat history, for example, the ChatGPT clone uses Cosmos DB. So you see here, we're in Cosmos DB. We have the responses from the LLM. Of course, I'd be happy to write a poem for you. Remember, we were talking about writing poems about Toronto as well. And so all this is saved inside Cosmos DB. Again, a great NoSQL database platform as a service from Microsoft. You don't have to manage it yourself. And if you want to look into the nitty gritty of how all this is implemented, as I mentioned before, it's in the Microsoft GitHub in the Azure Chat project. And then you can see how everything works behind the scenes. For example, here I have open this particular document where we can see, let me find it here. We can see here how the upload in the file operation happens, right? So we have a file, we instantiate a new document intelligence client, we analyze the document, we get all the paragraphs back from the document, and then we actually index all those paragraphs through the AI search as well. If you want to see some of the prompt engineering that happens behind the scenes, you can see here actually where We tell the LLM that, oh, we extracted these parts of a long document, create a final answer. If you don't know the answer, just say that you don't know. They'll try to make up an answer, right? So this is kind of like what people call prompt engineering, right? How you present the data and the problem to the LLM for the LLM to say something about it, right? So you can see here where it says, it gives you this intro to the LLM, and then it says context, and then it injects the context from the document, the paragraphs that Azure AI Search thinks are relevant to the question, and then the question. And that's how the LLM answers behind the scenes, how the LLM answers related to the context that you're passing through. All right. So that's a lot. It's a lot. And I want to leave a few minutes here for questions. So let me just jump in and do the recap, and then we'll be done. So, Gen AI, early, fast moving space. I don't know how many screens I just went through in the last half an hour, but there's a lot there, a lot to learn. The it's just moving very fast, and it is still very early. I think it's a great field for people to start looking into and start learning the main patterns, the main way that the workflow works, the main way that you interact with these models, because this technology is just going to get bigger. It is not going anywhere. Enterprise needs are unique, of course, and that's where I think Azure OpenAI really shines. It allows you to wrap that OpenAI functionality around your enterprise. Very easy to get going, both with all the playgrounds and the user experiences, as well as code wise. There's a lot of code samples and even interface, like I showed. You can click view code, gives you all the code as well. Now we have new tools such as this new evaluations workflow, such as the new prompt flow capabilities. So I'm going to dive deeper on those in the next few weeks as well, and hopefully come back with more of that. And Azure provides multiple services to put a full solution together, such as Cosmos DB, document intelligence, AI search, and so on. And we expect, obviously, and we know now, based on all the Ignite announcements, that the service is just going to continue to evolve, offer the latest models, latest APIs, all the latest capabilities from OpenAI directly into Microsoft. And now, not just OpenAI, but also all these other new models from Meta, NVIDIA, and open source models from Hugging Face as well. All right, so let me jump in here and see if we have some questions. So Alex B says, what's Microsoft data protection policy regarding proprietary data we use to train the model on? Does Microsoft ensure our data is not used for training their own models? Yes, 100%. So this is one of the main biggest differences that I think will make people want to use Azure OpenAI, of course, is that everything, all the regulatory and legal surroundings of your Azure consumption apply to the OpenAI model, right? So, as I said before, you're not bringing your data to OpenAI, you're bringing the OpenAI model into your subscription on your data, and everything that is there is protected legally. The data is yours. Microsoft does not train on it 100%. That same question from another question from Alex says, does Microsoft provide a model comparison table to help them choose the correct model for their project? So there is I didn't have time because again, there's so much to cover. But Alex, if you have some time and you do have an Azure subscription, if you go to the Azure AI Studio that is on preview now, there is a section called benchmarks, and you can pick different models, and it gives you all the different metrics. You might have to do some research. I had to research a bunch of the metrics because there were some that I had no idea what they meant. But with a good online search or even talking to ChatGPT, then you can find explanations of what all the metrics mean, so that you can kind of start comparing and contrasting different models. Raj says how many documents we can upload and limitations like size and allocation, and is it secure? So Raj, the document piece that you saw there is all implemented through blob storage and Azure AI Search. So the limit is on what Azure AI Search has as limits. I believe the documents can be fairly big. They can be like multiple GBs, and the quantity can also be very large. I don't know what will be the limit of the Azure AI Search index, but we're dealing here with more of a, not so much as what is the limit, but how much are you willing to spend, right? These Azure AI search services, you can scale them up all the way to very, very expensive consumption per day if you had really had a use case where you needed to index millions of documents, right? Same with blob storage, right? If you needed to index, I don't know, a terabyte of data or something like that, blob storage will take a terabyte easy. But it does, of course, will get quite expensive at that point. Um, but yeah, the whole idea again is that you develop everything inside that Azure sandbox so that everything is protected, all the policies apply, and everything is secure. And the last question from Raj is suggestions or resources like step-by-step labs for Gen AI applications. So definitely go check out the Microsoft Learning Academy. There's a lot of good stuff there. There's also some third-party services as well that are starting to put out a lot of Gen AI learning material, but Microsoft has some pretty good quick starts and samples that you can get going, just like the one that I just showed there on the GitHub. dur- 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 dur. RJ says, does Azure OpenAI handle data that is to the tune of 10 raised to the power of 10, typically for research orgs? Does it allow data sovereignty to extent where the data is not accessible publicly? Um, so OpenAI, so when we say OpenAI handle data, so OpenAI, the actual OpenAI service is not handling the data, right? The data is being handled by the Azure AI search. And again, the Azure AI search, you can index a full blob storage container if you want and create a massively large index. The question is, how much money are you willing to spend, right? So my answer would be like, it's not OpenAI really that's handling the data, is these other cloud services that Microsoft themselves use for Microsoft consumption that handle the data, right? And then they can, as long as you have the money, you can scale these services to, again, hyperscale, right? Blob storage can go to petabyte scale. Azure AI Search, same thing. You can have terabytes of index, but it is expensive. So something that to keep in mind. And does it allow data sovereignty? 100%. So if you place your blob storage in a region and you place your OpenAI service in the same region, then you are safe. And your data is not moving out of there. You're bringing the OpenAI tech into your Azure subscription instead of your Azure subscription data out into OpenAI. So it is not accessible publicly. So there we go. Thanks, everybody. Thanks, RJ. All right. So yes, if anybody has time to take the survey as well, we appreciate it to get some feedback as well. All right. Thank you everybody for joining today. Yeah, appreciate it. And hopefully this got everybody a little bit interested, a little bit curious about that technology. Yeah. Until next time. Thanks everybody. Thanks for watching. Thanks for joining. Join the community as well. We have the Microsoft Reactor, all the different socials. Twitter, X, Facebook, YouTube, and the meetup as well. And there's a lot of good events coming as well in the pipeline there for the Reactor Toronto group. So definitely check it out. Thanks, everybody. Have a good day. Until next time. Bye bye.